Hello, friends. Tattooed Biker here with you, and tonight I've got true stories of hikers being stalked while out on the trail. Now, I don't know what's hunting these hikers, and neither did they, but maybe, together, we can help them figure it out. Now, grab your compasses, and let's ride. Number 1. Dear Biker, I have something unexplained that I would like to share. This incident occurred in August 2009. I was hiking alone in the Cascades in Oregon. I was in a more remote area of the range along Gordon Peak Trail. On the 6th or 7th day on the trail, the hair on the back of my neck started standing up. I chalked it up to being a mountain lion in the area, but the weird thing was, the uneasy feeling never quite left. That night is when I heard the howling. It wasn't wolves or bears or any other animal that I've heard. The closest thing I could relate it to is the noises that apes and monkeys make. This persisted for the next few nights, and eventually things started rummaging through my campsite. Naturally, I assumed it was a bear or raccoon. But then, on the 11th day, I woke up and my food bag was removed from the tree. Something had cut or tore the line. All my food was gone, but I decided to keep pushing. I had 4 days left till the end of the trail. I'm familiar with what I can eat and can't eat in the area, and I could always fish for food. The same nightly activities kept occurring, and on the 13th night, something started throwing rocks at my tent. For some reason, I just lost it. I screamed into the darkness for whatever it was to leave me alone, hoping it was just some person messing with me, and maybe they'd scream out for me to leave it alone. Instead, it grew quiet for the first time in nights. Nothing at all could be heard. And then, a scream louder and more vicious than any other cut through the night. And then nothing. Complete and utter silence. Not even the usual nighttime sounds. Despite it being quiet, I wasn't able to sleep that night, so I just waited. The next day, I continued on my hike, dead tired, just wanting to get out. The hair on the back of my neck still standing, and the forest still deathly silent. I felt like I was being hunted. Towards the end of the day, I sat down to rest before pushing a few more miles when I saw it. Something tall and large, bigger than any man or animal I'd ever seen, sliding through the forest without making a single noise. I yelled at it, and it turned to look at me. I never got a good look at it through the trees and the brush because it was dark, but I knew that whatever it was, that was causing this. I threw a rock at it and then pulled my knife. This thing just kept staring at me. I don't know what kicked in, but suddenly, I was no longer scared. I was just angry, and I ran at the thing. And it ran from me, and I chased it through the woods. It had very long strides, and it easily outpaced me, but I continued the chase. After several minutes, I gave up and collapsed in exhaustion. After resting for a bit before backtracking my way back to my backpack and area, I was tired, so I just made camp there. Another night of silence, and when I woke up the next day, I had about 10 miles to go until I was out. Exhausted, hungry, and also mentally drained, I slowly made my way out of the forest. As I got closer and closer to the end of the trail, the typical forest noises began to return. Birds, bugs, and mice running through the undergrowth. All these noises slowly came back, and I no longer had this feeling of unease. I got to the trailhead, sat in my car, and I just cried. To this day, I still pass it off as someone just messing with me, but the way that thing moved through the forest, I just don't know. I told a park ranger about it, and he jokingly said they have a bunch of Bigfoot sightings in the area, but most likely it was just a local messing with me. Or maybe my own imagination. I do a lot of long hikes, but that 15 days was by far the worst. Thanks for reading. Signed, Charlie. Number 2. Dear Tattooed, Before I begin, a bit of background. I'm 28 years old and I live in Kent, England. Ever since I was a kid, I've always had this weird obsession with the United States, traveling through the states and generally seeing lots of sights. Now, I'm not a city guy. Far from it, actually. My parents are both farmers, and I like the outdoors a lot. I even joined a rock climbing club when I was in my teens and met two good friends, James and Grant, who we'll call them here, who came on the trip with me in 2012. I had always planned to go to the States, Colorado, to be specific because of all the forests and the mountains. We all agreed to go and saved for a year, and then off we went. We were in Denver, and later we traveled south, through Colorado Springs down to Walsenburg, and then headed west, and ended up in a very small town after about 4 to 5 hours, somewhere close to the New Mexico border. We had actually got there due to meeting some friends in Denver, who were keen explorers like ourselves, and they asked if we wanted to join them on a camping trip, and so we did. There were 5 of them. We'll call them Chris, James, Richard, Melissa, and Lucy. And us 3, myself, James, and Grant. The first 2 nights were great. Chris and Richard liked to hunt and had brought along their rifles with them, and they taught us a few things about shooting and whatnot. On the 3rd night, all 8 of us went on a little walk through the forest, having a look around and taking in all the amazing views. The girls, Lucy and Melissa, wanted to head back to the cabin to start cooking dinner for us, and so Richard went back with them. This left Chris and the 2 Jameses, Grant and I, to roam around. Up ahead on the trail, I pointed out to Chris I saw what looked like a deer, but as quick as I could grab their attention and turn back around, it was gone. I had probably made way too much noise, to be honest, and scared it off, but a few minutes later, we saw it again. It was a little weird, though. It looked a little darker than a deer and had more fur. For some reason, it just didn't look right at all. It was like a man on all 4s or something, and it just didn't seem to move very smoothly. I must have been so focused on this deer that I was completely oblivious to the smell that surrounded us that Grant pointed out. It smelled like death and blood, but seemed warm and metallic at the same time. It was absolutely horrible. I asked Chris if there was some kind of factory nearby, but he said there wasn't anything really like that for miles. It really did smell awful. It was absolutely stomach-turning, and I have a strong stomach from living on a farm for my whole life. We turned back anyway to head toward the cabin to meet the others. And after we walked for about 10 minutes, I saw what looked like the same deer in the distance to my right, and I swear to God it suddenly stood up on its hind legs. I called Chris at the front and said to the others to look to the right, and they did. James laughed and said it looked like a guy, and Grant suggested it was another group of people out walking as well, but I told them it stood up, and that it was the deer from earlier that I tried to get them to look at. I was adamant about this, but they looked at me like I was stupid, as it was definitely a figure of a person with his back to us. Chris called out at it, and there was no reply. He called out again, and still nothing. Then we all shouted out, "Hey, are you okay over there?" The reply was subtle, but loud enough to be heard. "It's Richard." We all looked at each other confused because he was supposed to be with the girls. He then called out again, "It's Richard." And it definitely sounded like him. Chris told him to stop screwing around, and we carried on walking. I looked back after no more than 5 seconds, and he was gone completely. That was no way enough time to just disappear without seeing him run off. We eventually got back to the cabin, and Lucy and Melissa were in the kitchen making dinner, and Richard was just chilling with them. Chris told Richard to not leave the girls again, as he was the only one with them and it wasn't safe to leave them alone due to wild animals. But Richard said he had been here the whole time. Confused, Chris, Grant, James, and I looked at each other and laughed. telling him we'd saw him in the woods with us, and you told us that it's Richard when we shouted at you. But he looked at us with a dead straight face and said, "Seriously, guys, I was here with them the whole time." And the girls confirmed it. We all just kind of shrugged it off. The three of them were in on the joke, and they must have obviously got us. I managed to wake up around 3 a.m. very thirsty and needed a drink, and that awful smell was back. The smell probably woke me up, to be honest. I went into the kitchen to get a drink of water, and I could hear rustling from outside. It wasn't like someone was walking, but sounded like someone was crawling around maybe. I turned on the outside light, which really didn't do much at all, but about 20 meters away at the edge of the forest, I saw another figure. It was very dark outside, and I'm sure I was just seeing things, but the figure was like yesterday, just standing there, motionless. A black silhouette with its back turned towards me. I started freaking out. I went back to the bedrooms and woke up the boys. They weren't really 100% awake yet, probably pissed off that I'd woken them up, but when I showed them what I was looking at, they soon came around. James opened the cabin door, which was facing where the person was, to get a better view, and we all huddled around the door entrance. James had a huge mag-light torch on it, and just shone it at the figure, and it still didn't move. Grant shouted out, "Hey you," which just made us laugh, but still, the figure didn't move. We were pretty alarmed by this point, and we decided to go back inside. As we turned around to go back in, we heard, "It's Richard." We all just looked at each other, and we all looked at Richard, and then chaos ensued. I and the others had no idea what the hell to do. Richard wasn't, to my knowledge, a guy who could throw his voice, but the voice was his, and Richard didn't speak. We waited for what seemed like a lifetime for the sun to come back up, constantly checking outside. Richard and Chris's rifles never left their hand. We grabbed the girls and just left as fast as we could. I'm sorry, I know there isn't much of a spectacular ending to this story, but I wanted to at least share what we saw. I hope all this makes at least some kind of sense. Thanks. Signed, Dante. Number 3. Hey TB. First off, I'm very nervous sharing this experience and would appreciate as much confidentiality as possible. I'm not sure if I would classify it as paranormal per se, but it was definitely abnormal to me and very, very creepy. I'm mostly curious if anyone else has had similar experiences in the area and feel almost compelled to share my story so someone else can put the pieces together and find out if or what nefarious happenings are going on around the forest in Oregon. It was the summer of 2020, and my brother and his girlfriend had convinced my boyfriend and I to go camping for the night. My brother was really proud of this new area of land he had found and was eager to put it to use. The campsite was about 15 miles up a steep logging road, above a very rural town of Falls City, and then a good 30-minute hike deeper in off the road. I've been camping off the beaten path pretty much all my life, but this is really out in the middle of nowhere. I don't think we saw a single car or another person the whole way out there. But the day went well and our night was uneventful. I awoke the next morning before dawn to a whistling sound. There were 2 distinct whistles, and they seemed to be going back and forth, maybe signaling or communicating with each other. At first I thought it was just birds, but as I laid there listening, I became less sure of that and started to wonder if maybe there weren't people out there with us. It really weirded me out, but once everyone else was awake and breakfast was started, it moved to the back of my mind. It was just birds, I assured myself. After breakfast, we were sitting around the fire when we started to hear yelling in the distance, followed by what sounded like a pack of excited hunting dogs. As we listened, the yelling intensified as well as the barking. I started to be able to make out the yelling. The voice I heard was a young man, and I swear I heard him scream, "Help me!" Until that point, me and my brother had been looking at each other, but both tuned in, and I tell him that he should go check it out. He walked down to a clearing on the path we had hiked in on and hollered hello a few times. All the noise immediately stopped and never started again. We packed up and left a few hours later. On that steep logging road back, we passed at least 5 cars that were headed in the direction we were coming from, deep into the forest. The road is very narrow, so you get a good look at who's on the road with you. The cars were all luxury model SUVs and very, very clean. Not what you would expect out in that area at all. The people inside weren't unfriendly, but they seemed to me that they all had a look of surprise on their faces at just seeing us out there. I also have to mention that none of them were dressed for camping, hunting, or shooting, and most of the women were wearing jewelry, dressed more for work or church. The entire ordeal left me feeling very spooked, and I've thought a lot about what could have been going on. Maybe just illegal hunting, I don't know. My brother has since been told recreation is not allowed in the area. I'm unsure of who he heard this from, but none of us go out there anymore. Thanks for reading. Signed, Anonymous. And there it is. All I have for tonight. 3 true stories of being stalked by the unexplained while out on the trail. So what do you guys think about these? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. And just a quick reminder that Kitty from Pinebox Tales is moving her entire channel over to Pinebox Mysteries. Rebuilding is hard, so if you want to help her out by subbing to her new one, I'll be sure and leave a link down in the pinned comment. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. And as always, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe. I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.